a reading for Poetics for the More Than Human World, which started as an online anthology, a dispatches project, and will soon be released by Spuyten Duyvil as a print anthology. It has, I believe the print anthology runs to well over 500 pages. International poets and commentators. So anyway, what we were looking for in defining poetics for the more than human world, that's is more than just writing about nature, right? We wanted to write with a perspective of finding the human relationship in the large system, and not just one individual looking at, contemplating nature. So that's what we were aiming for, and hopefully we will get there. And you can certainly order one of the anthologies to find out. Our first reader for today is Lisa Fleck, Don Diego.
Okay, thank you, Bernie, and thank you, Mary, Charles, and all those who have done so much to work on this project and see it through. My plan is to read 3 poems in all, and after the first one, I'll give a little history behind it. I've been thinking a great deal about how we need examples of and teachers of the old ways of respecting nature. I'm going to read poems about 2 such teachers, Mao Piailug, whose knowledge of navigation has been lost, perhaps forever, and Jada Payang, whose sheer persistence to plant a forest created a kind of miracle. A Micronesian Grandmaster navigator, Mao Piailug, was also known as Papa Mao. He was nicknamed Mao in his native language for the hawksbill turtle, which meant strong, hardened, and mature. He died in 2010 and is considered the last of his kind. The poem, which is from the anthology, is entitled The Sea Whisperer. The last to understand the secret talk of light, he began by studying coral chunks on a woven mat, pored over the ancient map, etched with stars, fish, birds, landmarks, the route through reefs and shoals. Through thumb and forefinger, he could tell latitude within a few miles. When sky closed up, ocean swells, their pitch and angle to the knife-edged canoe would be his guide. Lost, he'd pull down sails, study waves and wind, and where he'd come from. He told his pupil, Nainoa, be fierce, wise. You only know where you are by knowing. I wanted to take a moment to say a few words about Piailug, who was the last Palu, a navigator who didn't rely on instruments, but only his knowledge. In his book, Steve Thomas told about sailing with him and his crew on a 6-day journey in 1998. Micronesia is an oral tradition, Thomas wrote. As the old navigators passed away, so did the opportunity to learn the talk of the sea and the secret talk of light. The knowledge he gave me, us, is priceless. I think of his fierceness as he defends a way of life he knows will die as the wise elders died. He has the courage to teach in spite of the knowledge that his struggle can never stem the tide of westernization. For Mao, navigation was a way of life and therefore vital. Westernization threatened and eventually eliminated his role as steward of his island's sustenance and keeper of the flame of cultural knowledge. He tried to pass on that knowledge to his pupil Nainoa, but eventually told him, because of your age, you will never see it all. If you want Hawaii to have a navigator that knows and sees all, send your children. A decade and a half later, Mao admitted, it's too late. I am too old. Our children have too much to learn, and it's too late. Then, trying to preserve a ray of hope, he said, when they put me in the ground, it's all right, because I have already planted a seed. When my people want to learn, they can come to Hawaii and learn about me. It's one of the obvious challenges we face. Modernization has gone too far in some cases, and people have to want to preserve some of the old ways that sustained them and were better for the planet. The next poem is about Jadab Payang, who over the course of 40 years single-handedly planted a 1,300-acre forest near the Brahmaputra River in India. Payang was once considered crazy by the locals, but now is celebrated as a conservationist. One of his followers, Furkan Latif Khan, said, "Every day he taught me how to plant trees and care for them. Since childhood, it's in my soul." The poem is called, "In the Grief of Dead Snakes, I Created This Forest." Each day, 3 months, a year, for 40 years, he cut branches, walked, took a boat, crossed the river, walked 2 more hours to get to the land with nothing on it. First bamboo, then cotton trees, all different kinds, hundreds of thousands. Elephants came, tigers, the rare white rhino. You plant 1 or 2 trees, once they seed, the wind knows how to plant them. The birds know how to sow them. Cows know, elephants know, even the river. He began when he saw the dead snakes, snakes piled on snakes, dying on the sand from no shade, and thought even we will have to die this way. My final poem is based on a question from a French writer, Terry Cohen. What would New York or Shanghai look like with a full sky of brilliant stars? It's called The Loss of the Starry Skies. The stars hidden behind cheap neon light, we forget nature. Skies vaporize. We no longer see infinity or what it might hold, short-circuited by skyscraped horizons. Our brains are lit up by billboards, eyes aglow with goods we can reach. The price we pay for the loss of our vision. Thank you for being here and listening.
Thank you. The next reader is Elizabeth Dodd.
Thank you. It's good to read with you all. The first poem I'm going to read is after a line by Anne Bradstreet. The line is "Cold frozen January next comes in." And it's a line from her poem, The Four Seasons of the Year. And I was writing this poem thinking of the fact, the alarming fact, that if you were born after the year 1985, you have never experienced a single month in which the average temperature of the Earth was below its 20th century average. Anne Bradstreet, of course, was writing in the 17th century, which was in the time of the Little Ice Age that gripped New England. So her time and ours are remarkably opposed, and I appropriated her line for the present moment. Cold frozen January next comes in. This morning, one suburban turkey stands midway between my window and the neighbor's dryer vent. His soul patch feathers flutter as he cranes his neck to watch me back. When I went out to clear the driveway, I found piss ice plastered on a tree. It's trickster coyote, blue shifting scent marks in a blizzard wind. There's a regular wildlife highway in the undeveloped woods behind the house. A snarl of tracks and scat threads past old rolls of wire fencing and cicada husks of rusting trucks. I'm sick of the president, sick of the news. So I walk down where the half-dry creek makes lazy river S-curves, slicked with luge run glaze. Where a deer crashed through the hollow ice, I stop. It's like a doll-sized room beneath a broken roof. The herniated polar vortex unwinds to lob another cold front, while a hemisphere away, wildfires burn forests rasped by drought. And I remember winter 40 years ago, when school closed and the river froze, and we walked across that still and craggy surface with no idea how the world was changing, the chemistry just then becoming visible, while our breath hung in the air. And my next poem also has ice in it. It begins in a high mountain tarn where I saw little tiny bits of ice floating as if they were birds. And then I found correspondence in Kansas, where I live, one year during dove season, when hunters had been discarding sections of white doves in the water. Mirror neurons. In a high mountain tarn, the snowpack was melting into exquisite small bodies of winter. I sat down to study, adrift in midsummer. I sank down to remember. I was lost in the long, last alpine look of those floating forms, like so many white birds, like the feathers spread once on the river's placid backwater, back home in the rain-shadow plains. Like the day I leaned into Alaska's offshore wind, watching through my binoculars seal pups balanced on platelets of ice, who watched back. On the river, I paddled the kayak into the scatter of feathers and stopped, droplets counting the seconds, the minutes. The feathers were doves' wings, whole skins ripped from the gripless dangle of their feet. The paddle paused in my hands. I remembered the ice licked by photons, quantum breath. When I tell you, are you lifting your hand to touch, like me, to touch the near bones, like me, between heart and throat? And for my final poem, I'm going to share my screen. It's an ekphrastic poem based on a sculpture by the artist Linda Ganstrom. And this is a almost life-sized ceramic. It's a glazed cast clay form, and what you see surrounding the form are actual seed pods. These are devil's claw seed pods. She exhibits this in different places with different organic forms around it, and here where I live and where I saw it in a gallery, it's the devil's claw. I thought all of the beautiful forms on her back looked a bit like ferns, and then I thought they looked almost like a mathematical rendition of Mandelbrot forms. So this is Fossil from the Anthropocene, after Linda Ganstrom. The woman's clay-fired form sinks into graywhack and stasis. Child's pose, only her ribs still hug her heart, while her subtle body casts Mandelbrot ferns across her back. Doesn't grief sleep in a chitinous cloak? Asana, asana, suff and surf. Seed syllables, devil's claw pods, unravel the basket she dreamed for herself. Once, their dry arms caught the hair of passing mammoths. Listen for the calcareous rustle of their forms. Listen again. Disappearances hiss.
Thank you. Right. Our next reader, SamSampson.
Hello. I'd like to begin with the poem from the anthology, which is titled Kia Toitu He Kauri, and that is from the native Maori New Zealand language, which is keep Kauri standing. And within New Zealand at the moment, we have an issue with kauri in the northern part of the North Island, where there is a sort of microscopic sort of fungus which is attacking the spores of the trees and killing them. and there's actually no cure at the moment. So there's a sort of collaborative scientific issue with trying to find what is affecting those trees. So for me, living among those and growing up among those, and also reacting to what is happening in this part of New Zealand, I started to put together a poem, and other artists sort of predominantly in this area. There'd been an artist, Colin McCann, who had constructed a series of Cowrie works, and I'll just put his works up as I sort of read through the poem, so you get a sense of how he was interacting with the bush of this area and predominantly the Cowrie. After that, there's my poem plus the a contemporary artist, New Zealand artist, John Reynolds, who responds to McCann's work as well. So I'll just... So this is one of Colin McCann's works. My poem responds to his work through the light and line, and also what I tried to do is have a horizontal and vertical structure to the work. And as local tree conservationists have seen, the X's placed on trees in our area are where the trees are felled, and they call them tree death markings. So, kia toitu he kauri. I came to grips with the Cowrie and turned him in all his splendour into a symbol. Colin McCann, 1957. X marks the spot. X mirrors Y. X, a visual backbone. Zeros, horizontal and vertical. Of light, X, Cowrie, twilight. Timeline, to climb blind, counter the light. A scaffold detaches an unframed path. X, microbes branch out. Photosynthesis between subcatchments, the edge and estuary. X, pathways, pathogens. An imprint, surface, sediment. X, a constant flow of light. Zero light, holy light. First light, inner light, outer light, outlined light. Framed light, filigree light, threaded light, said light, dead light, syllabic light, swallow light. Born light, bone light, alone light, aligned light, lateral light, broken light, street light, neon light, headlight, sunlight, starlight, moonlight, ritual light, sacred light, secret light, tangential light, X, absentee light, mint light, mineral light, scallop light, saline light, opaline light, open light, single light, straight light, scattered light, crushed light, shadow light, clear light, X, wave light, lapping light, falling light, travel light, talk light, scent light, digital light, past light, present light, faint light, green light, go light, X, ghost light, land light, liquid light, draw light, enter light, half light, scent light, slant light, shive light, sand light, still light, black light, white light, X, cut, left, then right, a southwest squall, horizon between top and toppled X, centre line, crisscrossed sign, scenic drive, Y-shape shifting helix, shards of summer's soil-born scent, a matrix, New Year's podcast, traces, arcs, X stands for Cowrie, sky high, dead centre, X stands symbolic, a skeleton in nature, X, Y, Z. The next work I'd like to read is connected to Karikari, which is a West Coast beach close to where I live, and my family have been part of that surf club since the 1930s. And if any of you have seen the Jane Campion's The Piano with Harvey Keitel, is the landscape or the beach in that work. It's a series of 3 haiku. The first talks about the Watchman rock, which is a central rock in the which divides the beach. And I was staying there on my 37th birthday, and I came upon a Walt Whitman collection where he said, I, now 37 years old, in perfect health, begin, hoping to cease not till death. And it was a sort of serendipitous moment where I sort of read that line and fed it back into a poem. The second haiku looks along the beach, along a walking track called Zion Ridge. And the third, where you see on the picture on screen, is a little steam engine that hauled kauri logs out of the West Coast region down to a wharf where they were transported to England and overseas as a sought after hardwood. So the first haiku, the poem is titled Ghost. Nest high on Watchman, 37 years old today, snap, Walt Whitman. Zion track, Kauri, a long drop sits south-southwest, mine drifts over sea. View through tunnel mouth, the sandfly steams out onwards, white cloud of ghost moths. The poem I'd like to finish with is called Halcyon Ghosts, and it's the title poem from my second collection. And it's based around a series of photographs by New Zealand photographer Harvey Benj, where he responded on a ferry with a series of shots of migrating birds. And for me, it was a sense of placing a word where a bird was, and Michael Palmer had looked at this work and said it's a type of presentational immediacy, which I quite liked, this idea that it was interacting in a sort of symbiotic relationship to what was going on. So the flighted path of the migrating birds connects to the words. But in my case, I'd started the poem on the recto, on the right-hand side, so that when you look at it, you had to actually shift your reading pattern until it started at a traditional left-right reading form, until the last stanza, where the words basically connect with the birds to become a sort of entity in themselves. So they are both committed and identical to the birds. And I think I discussed in the discussion the idea of the Ed Harris Pollock movie, where Lee Krasner had asked him why he didn't paint or imitate nature, and he said, I am nature. So the idea that the words themselves actually are in that relationship. So I'll read that now. There is a series of 5 plates. This is the first plate in the poem before the words keep turning on the birds. There are 2 epigraphs. The first, and I dreamed we were still alive, dreamed we were not yet born, dreamed we were yet to be. Michael Palmer thread. We are as free as birds, only the birds aren't free. We are as committed as birds, and identically. John Cage. Halcyon ghosts dress as mock kings, where kingdom come, where coloured embroideries waltz door to door, leave colanders on doorsteps, sing songs of ecology, hitch sunsets to horizons, dance ritual chain dances, settle on wires at local crossroads, settle on wires at local cemeteries, invite gods to sing wishes of good luck, carry huia from house to house, wear masks and feather cloaks, perform winter miracles, bathed with priests in the Ganges. And bright coloured flags flew from stations, and a jar placed in Kingsland, earth both a passage and a chamber, an amp and ampersand, and round it the solar year, its 13 lunar cycles, and the moon travels 13 degrees across the sky, and the shadow of Thor, great Dane dog, star-crossed it to and fro, and each day we fed mice to kingfishers and built lace-like structures, and in Titirangi tied different types of twine around tea trees, buried scones shaped like shoes, offered sacrifices of honey bread and cheese, swallowed psalms, magenta, black, green on orange, and left 13 at the table, and Halcyon marked the edge, one many circles. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Newell is our next reader.
Thank you all. Wonderful to read with you. I live near the Hudson River on land that was once part of the Wappingers Confederacy. And my first two poems are about the Hudson River. Intersection witness. Say the wakes of a sailboat and a plump of mallards intersect. Many V's flange out behind their gliding. Plankton pushed to the V-arms roll over with turbulence, spuming while in between the water is slick. The wakes run interference on the tide, deforming waves that lap the shore. Say someone standing on shore tries to unravel that rippling skein, tracing backwards from the waves, while her rapt companion sways to the undulations as the laps refresh her feet. In the pith of intersecting wakes, say life is complex, perplexing, has beauty, pattern, meaning embedded in that tangle or in its witnessing. This next poem is called Bank Tangle, and I am thinking of Charles Darwin, a quote from Charles Darwin. He used the phrase tangled bank to refer to the intermixture of life forms, quote, dependent upon each other in so complex a manner. Bank tangle, train stop anomaly, twig nest tucked into branch tangle, river scan, plummet, breed. Across the Hudson, homes tucked into bank slope. Survey, embark, dwell, settled in for the duration. 19 miles downstream, smoke rises at Indian Point. As the river ambles north, history's wheeze in eddies, palimpsest laden with fuse. And the rest of the poems that I'm going to read all share the particle in the pith of, pith being the empty and nutritive part of the stem of plants and trees. It's both spongy and has vacancies through which water and nutrients can travel. In the pith of hover, when we stand still, our head's weight tilts us forward. Momentum prompts movement to resist falling. Wing flaps let some birds hover, a strenuous mid-air suspension. Kestrel matches wind speed head-on, poised in transparency to foresee. Osprey hangs still to focus on foraging. Hummingbird parades his ball and socket shoulder joint, his wing lift on upbeats as well as down. Skates figure eights before the trumpet flower's throat, sips deep, flashes luminescence, wheels away. We are left staring at vacancy, sensing wake turbulence, vortex from activated wings. Sometimes we wait alert, thirsty for an intimation, an evanescent summons. In the pith of attenuation, excruciate at the crossroads, chiasmic tangle, climacteric muddle, Janus pull, cross wires, warp wrap, heed elusive, scale nuance, interval trill, attune, consonants throb, murmuration. And for my next to last poem, I'm going to read a new poem. It's kind of still in process, but having to do with our current situation. And it's called Sieg. Pandemic, panic, pandemonium. A hummingbird tangles with salvias. Generations of entwining fold into this smooth bonding, while among bipeds, closeness courts disaster. Number crunchers gasp. The birds unruffled. Food staples stacked in sequester. Bodies loaded on a cold truck. The silence of corpses. Hummers less crucial than bees who fertilize food blooms, but isn't sheer delight a nourishment? Hummer locomotes by quiver, broadcasts by wing whir, ripple of flight wake, figure eight spinouts flash iridescent green, needs frequent sweets to sustain fast pulsing heart, whiz zip, hover to sip with forked tongue, drawing in nectar from deep-throated blooms. Human to human resilience in difficult stints, plunge into rustic skills, sieg towards supple adaptation. Salvia's trapdoor stamens rub pollen on transfixed head of sipper, who soon flits with gold corona to mix pollen from red, blue, violet salvias. These potent pollen blenders forge the ultraviolet tone. Some of us, some days, tumble to profound solitude. Fissures from nutritive depths bubble up, lucent. And my last poem is about diapause, which is a temporary developmental arrest of insects, and in this case, butterflies, if the environmental conditions are adverse. In the pith of diapause, tone held through the gap between crawl chew and flutter sip, weather churn. On the brink, wings rolled ready, colors soft through chrysalis wrap, slow unfurl, finding the updraft. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next reader is Cheryl J. Fish.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks again for Charles for recording us. The poems in the collection are based on a stay at an artist residency in the north of Finland in 2018, and my research and writing on artistic activism in the Sami areas of northern Scandinavia, Finland, Sweden, Norway, and the Kola Peninsula of Russia, which I've been working on for about 12 years as resistance to mining and extraction in that area. It's also focused on friendships I've developed and been grateful to have formed over these past years. And they're forthcoming in my next book of poems with photos, The Sauna Full of Maids from Shanti Arts Books. Okay. Artist residency at E, Finland. Along the E River, water's cold, but I swim anyway. Early September, rowboats waiting, shy. Sami artist Carola Gran carved these words on a sign along the river. My name is nature, please fuck me. Sana, sculptor of bronze, founder of this residency, lives next door. She shows me where to pick lingonberries, bilberries, tart and small, everywhere on low vines. In the center of I pronounced E. The young man behind the counter at Orient Kebab Pizza tells us in perfect Finnish he's an Iraqi Kurd. One of only a few in a small Finnish town, his family gassed during the war with Iran. It is said E is a modification of a Sami word for a place to stay. I will stay for a month in the Northland to make bridges with words, air, girl, water, daughter, city dweller in the mushroom forest. Sana invites me to eat with them at the table in the yard. I have worked alone for so many years, she explains, serving salmon, potatoes, and salad. Her friend B, whom she met when her husband abandoned her, is full of the drink. He calls me stupid in between his rapid sneezes. He assumes I voted for Trump, and I cannot convince him otherwise. Sana sculpts women in leaves, women with fish, graffitied women, women with feathers, women in treetops, offers rides to her friend, also named Sana, who doesn't own a car but drives a taxi at night. Survival is our name. Don't fuck with us. The Ice Hotel at Jukkasjärvi, Sweden. Sun glares off our sunglasses April above the Arctic Circle. Sophie, Nico, and I set out to visit the Ice Hotel, giant rectangular igloos where tourists sleep in furs, dreaming with white candles and mirrors. They charge high fees to enter the Ice Hotel. We don't pay to survey beds with reindeer pelts, fantastic bird memories in glass. Down the road, the Sami Cafe in a Lavu tent with its central fire warms us. We seek the sky through the top of its folds. Ice, sharp yet fragile. This town was a Sami marketplace. Now murals of Sami depicted in colorful gaktis with Lutheran missionaries in the small red church from 1607. I hear stones breathe. Not far away, the colossal Kiruna iron ore mine bores deeper, operating 24 hours a day. The town is sinking. Citizens' monuments, homes must be moved or demolished. From cracks and crevices, the sound of cash. Iron and ice, fire, quiet inside, time's refraction, waters rise. Sophie and Nico hold my arms, guide me from step to street. Without any boots, I'm a sliding stone. She's a Sami filmmaker excavating the past as ongoing, present. Every time a child climbed in the playground, a mine hulked, poisoning the sky. Or always matters more. He's a miner like her father. What shape? Love's glint. Nations circle the water on alert to take more as ice and glaciers melt with ease into the barren. And this last one from the anthology is Unreliable Snowpack. In the Kalevala, a barren place where birds lay eggs. The bottom half of a smashed egg becomes earth. In winter, our experiment includes flooding an icicle. Something went wrong in the undergrowth. Reindeer can't forage for lichen, trapped between layers, rain on snow, melt, freeze, death follows. And I'll close with a poem from my recent book, Crater and Tower, which is based on time I spent with a group of writers, mostly, and scientists at the Pulse Gathering at Mount St. Helens Volcanic National Monument. In 2010, Elizabeth Dodd was also there. It brought back my PTSD from 9/11, because I live very close to Ground Zero, 9/11, World Trade Center. And in honor of the 19th anniversary coming up this Friday of 9/11, this poem is called Post-Traumatic Posters for Jim Kahn. We hid in your apartment with our 2-year-olds on the border of evacuation and underground, no waterfall and tourists. You said hula hoops, not go anywhere. Invisible judgments and footprints, TV and soundtrack outside, sirens and blasts. In blissful ignorance of terrorism, mangled feet and furniture fragments, Tribeca, trifecta, calculations, post-traumatic poster children know their parents are gone, or they know nothing. Now a 9/11 museum and shopping, a transit hub, selfies on the plaza, and the shiny, briny steel tower and hulking Oculus. First responders facing death can't get health benefits from DC. The slurry wall leaked like their intestines. You and I barely listened watching the toddlers elope, post-madness, mirth. While all the ladders and engines and heroes took care of whomever they could, we saved each other. Now we rarely speak. I hope I mean more to you than that fast hug on the street, that public relations gaze. I never knew you, and you grasped little of me. Grown-ups make substitutes, night for day and day for disarray. Not like our children playing, we count ourselves awake as witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next reader is John Shoptaw.
Thank you, Bernie, and thank you, Mary and Charles, for all your work in assembling these readings and this anthology I can't wait to hold in my hand. This one from the anthology to be in my hands is called Vertigo. Our morning drive down the Redwood coast is off. It's a spare the air day, thickening already with particulate sunlight and ash flakes. Last night, far north of the bay, a wildfire made its own weather, like a climate, whipping up a fire whirl, a funnel flame, a fire NATO that twisted ablaze conifers, photo albums, and stiff chaparral and spiraled them skyward into a mile-high smoke torrent that jetted over the continent, over New York, New England, and the North Atlantic. Unbelievable, we say, meaning inconceivable, a staggering wonder that plunges some into an inert disbelief. Madeline drove Scotty down the peninsula and parked her green Jaguar at the sunny brink of the Big Basin redwood forest, which makes its own atmosphere like a planet, verdant with fog and giddy with oxygen. They entered in silence its dark cinematic hush and walked among trees grown to a vertiginous height, stopping before a broad Sequoia sempervirens cross-section with dated growth rings. 1066, Battle of Hastings. 1930, tree cut down. 1958, filming of Vertigo floats a little beyond the fibrous red bark, like a vapor. Looking at it feels like looking down into an incredibly deep well that perspective narrows into a funnel. This foreshortening of the historical abyss into the present is what film buffs call the Hitchcock zoom, when the camera backs out and zooms in, or zooms out and closes in, so that viewers suddenly become aware of the scene, impinging on or casting off from its focal character. Usually it's hard to see the climate for the days, the carbon emitted by Madeline's green Jaguar doing its part to this day to heat our planet. But an unreal, unheard of weather event will zoom the overlying climate into focus for a moment and bathe us in an icy astonishment, as though the Earth looked around and saw it was the only planet swaddled in habitable gases. But nothing can keep on knowing like that, so the days look up and move on. The smoke turns away from the bay, and tomorrow they say the weather will be fine. This one is in a form I invented, a variation on the sestina, which I call a quartina. It's called Unseasonably. From the upwelling, kelp-forested North Pacific, an icy air springs upon our eager coast, which grows heavy with the fog that summers in the Bay Area, where its cleansing droplets seem to fall as if to help us flora and fauna weather another dry winter. Today's irresistible, so we give in to it. But to acclimate to the new winter, while it lasts, wouldn't that hard hug be a kind of despair that springs from the denial of a lithe hope practicing cartwheels? We may fall into an amusing conversation, but we know where she's turning, it's dusk and it's summer. A warming dark water feeds on the summer ice of the Arctic Circle, leaving a dozen gaunt gray whales to undulate south for the winter and glide under the orange vermilion bridge into the bay, where they fall away from those left to calve or mate in the Baja lagoons come spring. But when left to themselves, the grays sprang back to midsummer numbers after falling nearly off the whaling charts. So might the years plump up and roll from one to the next sodden winter. This last one is called One Fall Equinox. Got up too quick. Earth spun around me, as if to set my circadian clock back an hour. My balance lost me, and I toppled back into the blue wicker rocker on the brown lawn where Earth was waiting. I missed it. The instant the equatorial intersects the ecliptic plane, and night or day gives way to day or night. The Mexican weeping bamboo is flowering everywhere at once, and September's dwindling crickets are stridulating too stridently. Count to 15 and they'll chirp you the temperature. 88 in the dark, which I take to mean you will find you drove past the tipping point sometime back. You must have missed it in the strobe-lit red fir sundown of Donner Pass. No point then in easing your foot off the pedal. From then on, any way you turn leads only to another stopgap. But I won't be going there just yet. I need to tell somebody about the turkling. Pecking for bamboo seeds, it finds itself on the wrong side of the deer fence and can't locate the tabby door back. Blop, blop, it reminds itself as it paces back and forth for yet another morning. But it isn't panicking. I'm here to tell you, it's coping. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final reader for today is Ann.
Hey, everybody. So I live in Mississippi, and I write a lot about Mississippi. I'm going to read 4 very short poems, which are all in one way or another about my area, North Mississippi. The first one is the one that's in the anthology. It's called The Day Lays Down, and it's about the Delta. I don't live in the Delta. I live about an hour from the Delta, but this is a drive through the Delta. The Delta is environmentally ravaged, and that's what this is about. It's the poorest, probably the poorest part of the United States. The day lays down, first summer heat, as we drive, turning this way and that by whim at random, beyond Clarksdale, through this country of the Delta blues, past cotton silos, pecan trees, Baptist graveyards, little swamps with floating trash, sometimes an egret, one-lane roads leading off past headstones, past alfalfa fields, and a yellow crop duster gassing up, getting ready to spray poison. So I write a lot about summer in Mississippi. Y'all were talking about how it's getting cooler. We're not really so much feeling it yet. And this one is called Mississippi Invocation. Come, green, fill our veins with tendrils and broad-lobed leaves. Wave as the rain approaches. Teach us the secret of swoon, exhaustion. Come, great-petaled magnolias, scrotal figs in the crooks of branches, scarlet bells of Carolina creeper, bruised gardenias, mosses and lichens that fur the bark of oaks. Come fungi, come buzzards, this teeming is death, is teeming. The walls of our houses, the doors of our senses dampen and soften. Plunge us into sleep and deliquescence. We are sap and vine and solstice. Ooze us, rot us, make us hot and hotter. Jasmine, wisteria, twine us and snare us. Stupefy us with your sugary blossoms. And that's from my book, The Bones of Winter Birds, as if winter could ever exist again. And now I'm going to read two poems from a recent sequence that I've been working on. And it's just called The Days. I started writing it early during this time of isolation. Day 27. I wish you could be here with me in the cupped hours between darkness and darkness, where the massive pecan trees open their nubbins of leaf toward the sky, where a robin hops and bobs through the wild-furred daisies and violets scatter on the scruffy, unmown lawn. And Annal skitters down the peace rose, dodging the thorns, emerald green with a throbbing pink dewlap. Bumblebees dive into the yellow snapdragon, and two Carolina wrens zoom past the back porch, where once again they will try to nest. This cup of light holds us, caught between darkness and darkness. Though I scrub my hands raw and lie awake at night, full of dread for my children. Day 32. A young stag at dusk, white tail flicking, eating flowers heaped on a raw grave, raises his head to watch us before he vanishes slowly into the trees. Outside the kitchen window, my peace rose rides on arching stems like moons in a lead-white sky. All year, earth holds them. I ignore them. Night thickens among the branches of ginkgo, maple, willow oak, cherry, redbud, and the thicket of bamboo that surrounds this wooden house. Sometimes I am afraid. At 3, I knelt on the back seat of my mother's car and looking out the window said, "There's so much to see and so little time to see it." Or so I've been told. It's like that now, watching the leaves. Bread rises in the oven. May the stag sink back into the forest. May the petals drop on the grass. Whoever you are, may you be at peace in this great silence where only the birds speak. Thank you, and thank you for doing the readings and the anthology, and I look forward to it.
Thank you very much for that. And thank you, everyone. And I'm now going to open up the chat room so that everyone can publicly and privately, as they say, chat with everyone else. And just open it up for discussion. So please feel free to unmute yourself and leap in with a comment, a response, something you'd like to discuss or bring up. We'd love to hear from you.
Anne, could you please read the last couple of lines of your last poem that was so gorgeous, about the may you be at peace?
Yes, I will. Sorry, I have a very nervous throat, and I'm like cool all day long, and then I get asked to speak, and I'm like that.
No, it wasn't that I couldn't understand them when you read them. It's that I can't remember the whole lines.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'll read the very end. So at 3, I knelt on the back seat of my mother's car and looking out the window said, there's so much to see and so little time to see it. Or so I've been told. It's like that now, watching the leaves. Bread rises in the oven. May the stag sink back into the forest. May the petals drop on the grass. Whoever you are, may you be at peace in this great silence where only the birds speak.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to make an observation that's not my own. And that was from an email that I was exchanging with Mary Newell earlier today, where she remarked that one thing that seemed to be a common thread among the people who are going to be reading tonight is the notion of narrative. And I was thinking that is something that we haven't discussed very much. And Mary in particular brought up the relationship between narrative and lyric, and the fact that they're often seen in poetic terms as being somewhat at odds. And she just kind of queried, why is that? What can we do? And it struck me listening to the sounds as well as the sentiments that was very true, that narrative really was present, particularly narrative as journey. Narrative is traveling, often in the most mundane ways that we cross the earth every day on our errands or whatever, our travels, but also with a real lyricism. And I wondered if anybody else had thought of that. Mary, would you like to chime in and elaborate on your original comments to me today?
Well, of course, I was going from the poems that were in the anthology, and many of you read other poems too, so it kind of enriches everything. But I think I don't have a conclusion about this, but it seems unnecessary to be stuck in a definition of what lyric is or does. But certainly I think we're all interested in process in the living world, and many of the readings struck me with their relation to time in different ways. Process, ancient customs, trees growing over time, how we relate to them. So there's this sense of a story which is not just my own. I think for me that's the important part. If we're going to try to write about the environment, that there are many stories going on, many ways to tell them, but it's not a story that I want to trademark, so to speak. But to open up to to as much as possible to the influences of the time and place. Anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was also struck by the geographic and temporal, the epochal range that was covered with Lisa's work and Sam's, and it seemed like a number of people, I took a bunch of notes, but it seemed like a number of people were, and Cheryl, your work in Scandinavia, that we were covering a lot of range, not only geographically, but also imaginatively, the kinds of mythical and traditional allusions that were made. Does anybody want to talk about maybe their relationship to those modes?
I'll say a little bit that for me, it's interesting to take something that I researched for scholarly articles and then say something different in poetry. So I just found that poetry is a great medium to express geology, geography, time, space, difference, similarity, myth, all of that, just somehow, because in poetry you have the freedom to use narrative or not, to use line. I like to play a lot with the way I break lines, just as a way of voicing these different conflicting aspirations and observations. So I think that when you're immersed in a place, either your own or a place that's new or a place that's you return to all the time, it just seems like poetry is an open field for making those connections.
Yeah, so I write a lot about place. Not being a Southerner by birth or by upbringing, I still find the South really fascinating and strange. I teach environmental studies. I had the environmental studies program at the University of Mississippi. So, I learn a lot that way about environmental conditions in Mississippi, which are really appalling. But it's a place of such amazing beauty and cultural strangeness and richness and complexity. So I guess I just, I don't only write about place. I write about a lot of different things, but place, trees, weather, a lot about the weather keeps showing up in my poems, just as a way of understanding my physical inhabitation, on the earth, and also as a way of trying to, I still think that the South is, for all the Southern literature that exists, I still think that the South is a little bit invisible to a lot of people who are not in the South, or visible in a not very accurate way. And so I find it interesting to try to write about that. But also just about the body, just the inhabitation of place.
I think maybe we're all especially attuned to time and to place in ways that we weren't before about February of last winter, right? There's a line from a Galway Canal poem that just kind of entered my head in about late March and just hasn't left, and that's the forever pre-trembling in a house that falls. And I have felt that way almost every day. Here classes have re-begun and I'm not on campus. I'm doing everything virtually. The Kansas behind me is virtual. And so I think I am better attuned to listen to examinations of the granular place and the zoom out as well, in ways that maybe I wouldn't have been in January. I'm just lamely observing that I hear those things too in all of this work. Most of the work was not written in the last year, but it speaks to us and maybe in ways that it didn't, that it wouldn't have had we not lived through the last several months together.
I have a question. I'm curious to hear from other poets if they've tried such things, what their strategies might be. Thinking about time and space in relation to climate change or global warming. With climate change, you're dealing with something on just a total different scale of space and place and time that none of us can experience. And I'm wondering if you're trying to get at not just an extreme weather event, which I tried to write about too. How do you do it if you try to take up climate change, take on climate change? How do you get there?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I'm not going to try to answer it, but I think scale is really fundamental to trying to write about the environment and a challenge, as you say. So be interested in what others have to say about it.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I think too is to write about it doesn't just mean writing poetry. It also means making sure to write to Congress people, making sure to write letters to the editor, to use writing skills to bring this issue to the attention of people who, frankly, not that many people read poetry. And so the idea of using our writing skills, because we all have spent years to decades thinking about how to use writing persuasively and how can we turn that and what venues do we want to turn toward and how do we want to write differently, directly, so that there's something concretely heard.
I think that's really important. I've always been against fracking, but one of the poets in our anthology, Robert Head, when he started writing about fires on the pipelines and people dying and describing it in detail, it affected me viscerally in a different way. And so it made me think that if we're trying to have an effect, there's something about choosing the kind of language that we use that would really affect people viscerally, because people are sort of numb to the idea of climate change and they have their opinion and so on, but how to make it real, I think, is or any of these topics, not just something you take in with your thought and say, yes, I'll do what I can, but just really immediate.
I've been focusing on the visuals of the protests against against extractivism, because I think the visuals are so strong. So I've been looking at art and poster art and videos, and so that's one way that we can work in different, if we can work in different media. I think it's great if we can take some of these ideas and have different outlets for them that can reach different audiences. I think that's a great point you made.
Well, and the elegy has sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. Go ahead, Elizabeth, go ahead. I can wait.
The elegy has a particular importance, I think, at least to my imagination now. And I'll just talk to you directly, Sam, for a moment. I mean, my brother has moved to New Zealand, and so I've been to New Zealand several times now, and seen tracks that lead up into the great kauri forests that are, of course, closed to the public because everyone is so terrified of transporting the fungus elsewhere. And one becomes so aware that the last of this and the last of that is constantly before the gaze, right? That those forests will never be seen again in any human scale because they are so ancient and so enormous and so uniquely evolved. And so part of contacting the Congress people is to effect immediate change, and part of the elegy is to give the spirit a place to live with grief.
Yeah, what you're saying is correct, and I think it does sort of correlate a little bit with the COVID thing. With the kauri dieback, what we have there is this sort of economics based around letting people move into the regions and letting people become part of those kauri forests and the tourism around the area, but also protecting those which are very spiritual to the indigenous people here, or the Maori, who have put a rahui on the forest, which is a temporary prohibition of people going into those walking tracks and forests. But the issue you have is that the councils still open those up when they feel it's right to do so. So you're having that sort of conflict between the economics and also the conservation. But talking more generally about the idea of constructing poems, for me, what I've been trying to do over the last few years is to sort of stop myself writing poems. I know that we try to actually encourage the process of creation, but I think by negating the creative process, sometimes you can actually find other ways to construct poetry. And for me, that has always been maybe moving towards collaborations and working with other people who see things in different ways. So there's that distinction between the phenomenal and the noumenal in a philosophical sense of whether you can see through what's there to something that's underneath it. And what I try and do with my work is, and working with other artists as well, is trying to actually create a process which opens up a process. And usually that means that I'm working in a state where I actually don't know what I'm doing. And that's where I want to be.
Sam, I was wondering if you could talk for a minute about the strikeouts in your work. You showed us a page and you were using strikeouts. And in the Light poem, which reminded me of Jackson McClow's Light poems, by the way, but his grid of words for light was very much embracing this even technological and engineering and the joy of artificial light. And I thought your poem really had this wonderful parallel, but in this different mood, reflecting our current circumstances. But I was interested in your visual typography and thinking about how you were working with that.
Yeah, I've sort of moved more towards, it's not concrete poetry, but I've always used strike-throughs. And I've usually visually, I've done it with some work spaced around here with water poems and trains, so you've got parallel lines so they never meet as well. But the strike-through element too is more about, I think I wrote in the afterword by the artist Jean-Michel Basquiat, who said, if I strike through a line, it makes you want to actually focus on the line and unearth the meaning. So I just sort of thought, in some way, it's not just a visual element, it actually has sort of meaning underneath it, to the point that it's not erasure, it's not a sort of concrete artistic visual work. It's in some ways I like the vibration between the actual text and the line. So there's a sort of vibrational mark, like a sympathetic string you would have on a sitar or something like that. So there's all these things moving through the work. A lot of people have done it before, but I've with the Kauri poem, if you printed it out and put it on the wall, it would stand tall like a Kauri tree. So it has that element to it as well. There's lots of stuff going on in the works that I do. Like I always forget, I think Ezra Pound, when they talked about his cantos and he was asked about it, he always said he didn't know exactly all the elements that went into making it because he had forgotten them. And I think when I make all the works, because there's lots of pieces in it, I forget the layers after a while, and I think that's important as well, because they then become sort of a subconscious sort of subliminal element. So that's I suppose one of the parts of the strike through. But I still use strike throughs a lot, but not as much as, I suppose that was the most intense strike through, which is based also on light as well. I like the idea of repetition and light.
I was interested in Lisa's invocation of navigation at the beginning, and got me thinking about poems as instruments of navigation through all the readings, really, and even your beautiful visual work, Sam. Had a kind of map-like quality to it, perhaps, or a schematic feel. So I was wondering if the readers or anyone could speak to poetry as an instrument of navigation. It seems like in this time we're navigating huge changes, and we know poetry has always been an instrument of not only spatial, not only temporal, but space-time navigation. But perhaps there's a scale shift now, which, as Lynn Keller says, entails the possibility that we might not be able to make the shift in the ways that we have habitually, that the mind can't just scale up, in the way there are transformations entailed that we don't yet have the We don't know our way through or around yet, and possibly poetry is an instrument of navigating these kinds of shifts. Those are my thoughts, but I'd be curious to hear what the poets would have to say about that.
My whole thing with navigation was, the steward thing. Are we good stewards of the world, and are we navigating our world now in a way that is beneficial? And that was the whole metaphor for that poem. Was, here's a person who was not disturbing the environment and was actually making things good for his people, and I wondered how we poets can be good stewards of the world by writing. But I don't want to switch away from your navigation theme totally, but I did want to go back to Cole's comment about the range, the big range topically and geographically, and just wanted to comment that the power of poetry is kind of like the specific confirms and illuminates the universal, and whatever locale you go to and whoever you are and wherever you are, we all have these things in common. So, and I also want to point out the power of one, and in the man who planted the forest. He worked 40 years and planted all by himself a forest. So I wanted to also put forth a sort of, I can't think of the word right now, but a wish for the world that we could all, participate and do something, even if it's only writing a poem. That would be my idea of a power and force in the world. But I guess we all feel that way.
Yeah, I guess my aim would be multiple maps. Of course, they're the neural maps with which we're experiencing the world, and just the idea of simultaneity, that we get so much information in a mediated form, that we have trouble digesting, but just the acknowledgement that wherever we are, however our condition is at the moment, that there are other things going on in the world, even the near world and certainly the far world simultaneously. So how to get this sense of the layeredness of reality. And I think and I think the call in there is to sort of shrink another call for shrinking the all-knowing view of romanticism or whatever, right? That whatever we see is only a little particle of what is really going on. And yet, at the same time, of course, if we're not in the place we are, then we're not anywhere, right? I think several of you have said that one way or the other, that to speak to the facts of our own situation, environment, and so on is a truth that that we can honorably do, but somehow to include these other ways of knowing about other things on the planet that we share, if that makes any sense.
I want to take off from that, the being where we are thing, and go back to the quote that you, Sam, brought up of Jackson Pollock replying, "I am nature." And thinking about that word nature, which I increasingly have a sort of ideological battle with, that, and find myself using the word world instead, because nature seems to instantly put a block up between us and them. As soon as we say nature, we're not a part of it. And so I love the Pollock comment saying, "I am nature." And if we use the word world instead, we recognize our own complicity, our own participation, our own seamlessness with that entity that we're naming. So I just would love to I'd love to get that word out of our vocabulary.
Yeah, I thought of that when I was doing that series of imitative images, and I think Michael Palmer, who saw that, called it presentational immediacy. And I quite like that idea, the idea that something is presented and it's immediate. So when I was looking at replacing those birds with words, as with the bird as the word type construct. I liked the idea that the birds represented a natural form. To begin with, you had images which were imitating or mimetic to those birds. But once you got to the last stanza in the work, the Pollock, I suppose, construct came to the fore, where the actual words were the birds. So you didn't have any difference between that. And I think that little epigraph by John Cage, where he says, "We're as free as birds," but the idea that we also are as committed as birds. So we are, in our own way, connected to that sort of construct of routine and synchronicity as part of the world. But I agree with you that nature really does throw us back to sort of this form of lyrical romanticism to a point where it takes us away from that collective sort of symbiotic relationship.
I guess to me, what's valuable about the word nature is the fleshedness of it. Not that I am different from nature, but that I am flesh and very much inseparable from nature, you know. So I guess for me, I think the world, that's interesting to think about, but that loses for me the kind of physicality, the kind of, you know, like right now I'm looking out the window and we're far enough away from Hurricane Laura that we're not seeing a hurricane, but we're seeing a storm. And the bamboo is really shaking and my body is covered with clamminess and sweat from this, you know, end of the summer weather. So to me, that's what's really valuable about the whole concept of nature is this. And to talk about the poem as navigation, because I was thinking about that and I like that metaphor. For me, very much, my poetry recently has been a navigation that has a lot to do with meditation and a lot to do with death and a lot to do with healing. So for me, it's more like a kind of navigation to an inner place. I don't know exactly how to say that, but not so much across the face of the world, but a kind of return to, and it's enforced by seclusion. It's enforced by the fact that I'm surrounded by undergrads who would love to give me COVID, you know, who are hanging out at the bars and killing themselves as fast as they can, actually killing their grandmas as fast as they can. But this inwardness is a kind of meditative grounding, a meditative, like it's a trip, you know? So.
Yeah.
I would like to say a word or two for nature as well. Because it carries all of the connotation of literary history and so carries the weight of the Romantic era. But if you go back to the Latin roots, I think as you pointed out, it's all about the flesh, right? It's all about generative power. And so it takes us back to what we were talking about a few weeks ago with the more than human world, right? That which precedes us and will outlive us, that which is larger than us. And so that it's a word that has tinges of deep time, I think, in its etymology. And I like that. So a word or two for nature.
Yeah, Ed Roberson makes a distinction between world and earth. And I find earth sometimes a good alternative word to nature, which, as you know, Elizabeth, you point out, it certainly predates the Romantics, and many of whom, like Keats, were not omniscient and at all. I cannot see what flowers are at my feet, you know. So, but yeah, earth for me is it's a word maybe that doesn't have the connotations that get in the way for others. That's navigation, by the way, for me. That you know, these are maps. You have words, and there are obstacles. Some need to go around words. Some need to head toward the words. So for me, like the great chain of being, or you know, the hierarchy, higher animals, lower animals. that's an obstacle, and I have to, in order to get to my life connection with non-human creatures, I have to navigate around concepts. So I have to write poetry that's conceptual to a certain degree, some poems. But yeah, Earth, because it's undeniable, here it is, there's that planet out there. So, and for Roberson Cole, probably have you read his introduction to Black Nature? Yeah, where for him, world, maybe not your sense of world, but his sense of world was the cultural world, the human world. But then beyond that, there's Earth. So yeah,
he's got that. Roberson has that great poem, "To See the Earth Before the End of the World."
Yeah.
Which sort of makes me think of the philosopher Timothy Martin's critique of the term world, and he describes this neighborhood outside in Davis, California, where all the streets are named after streets in Middle Earth, and it's like the sort of ultimate suburban dystopia. And he says, the world has been ending for Western folk for centuries. Let's just get done with it. The world has ended. Let's assume the world has already ended, and then we can start to come to grips with Earth, perhaps. Or, I think nature in the older sense, to me, the term has always had two senses. One is the cultural, and one is that more sort of, and not to say this isn't also cultural in a certain sense, but the scientific, physical notion, the entire physical universe, nature, matter, sort of what you were saying, and flesh. And to me, that has value in the Darwinian sense of, kind of putting humans in their minuscule spot and just pointing out that we are very much a tiny speck of something much, much larger than ourselves. And world, and it seems like the problems with nature is that it's world going covert for so many centuries. Nature has been someone's world, masquerading as a universal. So it's useful that they don't coincide, and I like that we have both, and Earth, world, Earth, and nature.
Bringing up Timothy Morton, I think, is really great because, in fact, he has some really interesting takes on the word nature also in terms of its being an othering term. And if anybody's interested, you can Google and get some of his articles online. But he's got some really interesting, and he focuses a lot on literary criticism in the way it relates to ecological studies and the way in which language impacts it. So yeah, good person to bring up. Thank you for that, Jonathan.
I think our job as poets is to navigate these terms and to try to figure out when they become in our way and divorced from our reality, really, when we're stuck in them because they've been so potent for so long in different ways, but that we're misusing the kind of potency we need to find in them. So I think that's how I see eco-poetry, is what's the problem of language in its relation to our current circumstances? How can we try to rethink language to help us reframe what we need to be doing in the way we're living? And I think as poets, that's important and valid and good. I also think just because of the time frame we're living in, we have to go beyond that and be citizens, and even beyond writing our representatives at this point. I think whatever being in the streets can mean during COVID, and I'm using that as a metaphor, I think we need to be in the streets even while we're writing and trying to figure out the problems of language, because it's that big. I don't have the answers to any of that, but to me, that's kind of what it means to be an artist or something in the world we're in.
Well, a number of people have brought up in the chats, at least, the word quiet. And I've really been enjoying this time of listening to you all, both in your readings and in the conversation, because it is so quiet compared to the political arena, which in the US is at a very high point. And I was thinking about how, in some ways, COVID is bringing us deeper into our bodies, at least into awareness that we can't just fly anywhere we want to fly or sort of exceed our natural capacities. And I think that to speak to Jonathan's point about navigating transformations, that quietness is something that poets can bring, that can mix together with political and other arenas, which is an important component.
Yeah, that's a great thing to bring up. And thanks, Sarah. That was really, and I also think it also makes me think of the way that quietude has been used in recent poetic discourse as a problematized state, and I think that's a really interesting thing to bring up. And how can quietness, the quiet, be opened up in a helpful way?
Mm-hmm.
And particularly, I'm thinking, because Evelyn, I really liked what you said about streets, getting out there. So how do we work those two together?
I think it's really different for every person. I live close to, surprise, surprise, I live close to a Thich Nhat Hanh monastery here in North Mississippi, which one would not expect for North Mississippi, but it's called Magnolia Grove. And it's a place that's really important to me. And I mention that just because I think that for me, if I can start from a place of quiet, then I have a sense of grounding for action that I take. And I have a sense also of not being destroyed by the horrible stuff that's around, But it's different for every person. People have different right ways to be or different ways that they have to be. I teach yoga, and that's super important to me. But I think as long as people are, just really sort of, in Ginsberg's words, putting their queer shoulder to the wheel and pushing hard, whatever form that takes, that's really good.
Maybe that, as we've been over an hour and a half, might be a good place to end. But again, thank everybody for such good thoughts. And I don't have next week's list with me, so
I put it in the chat. It's in there.
Okay.
Let's see. It's there.
And it's also on Facebook with the bio, the little biographies of everybody.
Yeah, if I can get there. Right.
Well,